Hey, everybody. I am so excited to have you here today. So, joining us in this episode is Dr. Stephen Barron, a psychologist and author from New York who uses the strength-based model when working with children, adolescents, and their parents. And in addition to that, he does presentations on various topics, including child psychotherapy, using positive psychology in the classroom, and enhancing resilience in children, which is so important today. The name of his book is Teaching with a Strength-Based Approach: How to Motivate Students and Build Relationships. A definitely must check out, especially if you are a teacher. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Marissa. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Awesome. Before we get into the inspiring stories from the book, I would love for you to tell the listeners a bit about your history as a psychologist in schools.
Sure. For 30 years, I was a school psychologist on both the secondary and elementary levels here in New York. I worked I was a building psychologist, and I had a variety of duties. In addition to providing counseling for students, I consulted with teachers, I consulted with parents, I ran meetings to determine a student's eligibility for special education services, and a whole host of other things as well. So I did that for 30 years. And after 30 years, I felt it was time to move on. And along the time during that time, I had a private practice, which I still do. And now I've gotten into writing and lecturing and presenting, and I'm enjoying it. It's a fun ride.
Good, good. And so I'm really curious, having worked with children for such a long period of time, what are some of the key differences that you have noticed between children back then and children now?
That's a really good question, Marissa, because I think there has been, in my experience, I have seen a real shift in why parents are reaching out to me and why children are being referred. Were being referred to me and for counseling or evaluations in the school. When I started this, which was in the late 80s,
Oh,
the referral issues centered around, especially in my private practice, behavior. Kids were aggressive, kids were bullying, kids were victims of being bullied. There was a lot of concern about self-control in children, ADHD, and that kind of thing. Over the course of time, there's been an evolving shift, I have felt, in why parents have been reaching out to me. And I think the data bears that out with other therapists as well. Now, without doubt, the number one concern is anxiety, followed by depression. Anxiety has just skyrocketed. I think of children across the world. There's the rate of anxiety and depression in children in the United States has exponentially grown. In fact, there's a statistic that the federal government estimates that about 20% of children ages 3 to 17 have some kind of diagnosable mental health condition, and which is quite a bit. And the predominant one is anxiety. And you might ask, well, why is that? What was responsible for making this shift from aggressive, acting out kinds of behaviors to anxiety? And I don't want to imply that there's no aggressive children. There still are, and I still see that. But I think it's a couple of things at play. I think one thing that has happened, which has really contributed to this rise, has been the pandemic.
right.
The whole COVID experience, here in the States, and I'm sure around the world, just upended our lives. And children who were going to school were forced to look at a screen all day in order to learn. And this went on for many months, up to a year in some cases, and depending on where you were located. And I just think the whole impact of how the pandemic impacted people's ability to communicate and reach out to other people, and the whole idea that the world isn't safe out there and there's threats. I think that's something for many children that became internalized. And so then when things began to open up again, it was a difficult transition. It was a difficult transition for adults too. Many adults
Yes,
that I know,
absolutely.
very much. There was one, it's funny that just as like there's one child I'll never forget I was seeing who had a lot of social anxiety when the pandemic hit. And when he had to stay home and had to learn from home, the schools were closed, he said, well, I'm going to have no problem with this at all because I've been social distancing for years. And he's right. He
I
did
have a
have a
feeling he's
problem.
not the only child who probably said that around.
No, he's not. There are many kids that felt the same way. It was for those children that were anxious and felt inhibited and not confident in their social skills. In some ways, the pandemic was, just what they needed, just what they wanted. And then when the pandemic ends and they have to go back out into the world after spending a good chunk of time socially distancing, as they say,
Yeah.
it was a difficult transition. So I definitely think that definitely plays into it. And the pandemic, the impact of it is still being felt. Another contributing factor is that there's a loss of learning. Children did not learn as effectively through the pandemic as they would have been if they were in the classroom. So kids are falling behind, academically. So then they're coming back, and a lot of them were behind the eight ball, and it's a very difficult thing, to bring them up to speed. So that I think is a whole big piece. I think the other big piece, which we didn't have in the late 80s when I started, which is prevalent now, is social media.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Yes, definitely.
I think that there's overwhelming data to show that the more time kids spend on social media, the more damaging it is to their mental health. Part of the reason for that is that children, their brain develops, slowly. And so in the teens, the part of their brain, the frontal lobes that have to deal with judgment and evaluating problems and problem solving is not really up to snuff. It's not really online fully. And so this is why we're seeing things happen, like children watch TikTok and they get influenced oh, that looks cool, that looks exciting. A big problem here in New York, I don't know if it's other places, is what's called subway surfing. We have public transportation here, and the trains are called subways, and kids somehow they're getting on the roofs of these trains.
Oh my God.
And they're standing and they're walking back and forth, and it's not a pleasant sight, because a lot of these kids get injured or worse.
I am shocked.
In fact, yes. In fact, New York, Google it. New York City, to fight it, has put drones up to fly around New York City, Manhattan, to see, got video of kids running on top of moving trains. These are not trains at the station. These are trains that are moving at a fast speed. So it just speaks to that, the kids are getting influenced by things that weren't there before, and they don't necessarily have the filter to say, okay, this is good, this isn't bad, this is bad, I shouldn't be doing this. They see, especially if it's a child who's feeling on the fringe and wants to break in, oh, this looks cool, but if I do this, people will notice me. I mean, it looks good online. Nobody posts the things that go wrong online videos. It's always the videos where they get away with it and things, Another thing that happened here a few years ago, there was a challenge for kids to drink bleach, bleach to clean clothes, which can be very damaging to your esophagus and so forth. So I think that social media, I'm not talking in very small doses. And the other thing with social media, it's unrelenting and it's addictive. In my day, if you were bullied growing up, it would be awful. But at least I would come home from school and I would have some solace. I would have a respite from what was happening. Now these poor kids who are victimized come home and it's on Snapchat, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, it's a text. There's no escape for many of them. So they're being bombarded with this. And I also think the addictive quality of social media creates a lot of tension at home between children and parents. And I can't tell you how many kids I see, they sleep with their phone in their hand. And we talk about That's not a good thing. And of course, they have all the excuses. Well, I need it as an alarm to wake up in the morning. I go, what about a clock radio? Kids don't use clock radios anymore, Dr. Barron. I go, well,
But they
meanwhile, these
could.
kids are up all
That's
hours of the night.
They could use clock radios. I mean, if
100%.
if you, as a parent, you could say, let's try this, like just taking the phone out of the room and focusing on sleep, because I mean, sleep is just so crucial for
Vital. Well, that's another piece. You mentioned parents, Marissa. I think that's another contributing factor. I think, parenting has never been an easy job, and I think today it's a very difficult job. You have many parents that, they both have to work, and they're stretched in so many different directions, and they don't have the wherewithal sometimes to enforce their times and maybe enforce their rules. Maybe they feel guilty coming on too strong to their child. They don't. There was a study I read that done in the UK, and that the average amount of time that in this study, at least, the amount of time that parents spend with their child daily, one-on-one quality time, was like 23, 24 minutes, some number like that. And a lot of times kids are left to their own devices, literally. And that's not always a good thing. So I think all of these things it's sort of like a perfect storm. They've all come together and just manifested itself in a great deal of anxiety for children, and depression as well.
Absolutely. And I think also going with what you said about with social media, there's also the idea of you can't filter anything on social media. So you could see anything you want to. And young children, especially, even teens, you're not often equipped to mentally deal with things that you are seeing, because there is no filter on so much social media, right? So you could see anything and everything, and many things you're not going to talk to your parents about, but you don't have the mental capacity to know what's safe, what's not safe for me, why I shouldn't actually be looking at this or watching this because of what it's doing to me internally and what it's doing to my mind. And then, like you said, it's an addiction, right? So they don't have adults. A lot of adults don't have that. Oh, just stop, just like turn it off, and go do something else. Right? You keep looking.
And that's excellent point. And two follow-ups to that. Number one, kids, when they watch social media and they're excited, the same part of their brain gets stimulated that when they do other pleasurable activities. So there is, on a neurological basis, they are getting turned on, in a sense, to this. And so, parents say to me, well, my kid, he fights. Why? He never wants to give up his phone. Well, there's a reason for that, because the amount of gratification is so intense that they're receiving. And especially if it's a child who's isolated and lonely and doesn't have a lot. And this was the problem during the COVID pandemic. Kids were not getting together to socialize. And so, this is where they got their fun, and it really comes back to you in a lot of ways. And the thing is too, kids are being the other point is kids are being overly stimulated. They're being exposed to things that they should not be exposed to. There are parental controls, but kids are very clever. I know here in the States, children are given Chromebooks. Schools get a lot of assignments on Chromebooks.
Yeah, we have that too.
And
yeah.
You have that here. But somehow there's supposedly controls on these Chromebooks, but a lot of the children that I work with, they're watching YouTube, they're watching whatever they want to watch, they're watching. And I asked them, how do you get around this? I thought there were safety measures and it's a school device. Oh, there's always a way.
Yeah.
We figure it out, and they do. The kids are outsmarting us with this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And the minute you figure one out, I know a few years back, it was the VPN. They would just put their VPN on and then they could, access whatever. And then you would figure that out. And then there would be a new thing. And I mean, you would only have to go on TikTok to find out, what do I do now? And there's a video about it.
And sometimes that's a good thing. Look, the other day I needed to know how to change a battery in my car fob, and so I went on YouTube. There was a 1 minute video. It was very instructive, and I did it. But I think that the other danger of that is that people are quick to go to YouTube and TikTok. Maybe they don't think things out for themselves. Enough. Children are looking to social media perhaps to problem solve and connection. And that's another thing. Kids are not learning as much the face to face back and forth, making eye contact, turn taking, in a conversation or in an activity. And instead they spend their time looking at a screen, playing these games, and some of these games are not appropriate for young children.
Yeah.
And the other problem too is that not all parents see it the same way. So some parents might allow their child to stay up all hours, and it does happen. I was just talking to somebody yesterday has a friend. My friend's able to stay up till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, playing these games on a school night, and he's only in like 12 or 13 years old. He's only in seventh grade here. So and so that puts the other parents that want to impose restrictions in a bind, And I tell parents, one of the things I advise parents to do is that as your child gets older, and they're coming into the age where you're going to be thinking about a phone for them or giving them some privileges online, that it's not a bad idea to have a conversation with your peers, with the other parents who your child socializes with, and ask them, what's your feelings about social media? What's your feelings about a phone? What are you thinking in terms of limit setting on it? What thoughts are you going to implement in terms of handling that? Just so like the peer community can kind of get on the same page and have an ability, and it's consistent. You don't have some outliers who are able to do it all hours, then it puts pressure on everybody else. Now, this isn't always going to work. You got our parents who are going to do it the way they want to do it, or just not able to enforce it for whatever reason. But at least I think it's a good conversation. It's no different than if your child is transitioning, going from one school building to another, and you want to touch base with your people and say, okay, what have you heard about the school? Anything about the teachers? What's the transportation going to be to get them to and from? How are we going to work this? This is no different. This is another transition in a child's life, going from pre-social media and cell phone to social media and cell phone.
I think also, one of the key skills that so many kids are lacking in that parents may want to consider, building in their child is that ability to communicate, is that ability to, speak to someone new, speak to someone they've just met. I was meeting with a key public speaker in Cape Town today, and he said, it's not the smartest kid who's necessarily going to make the most money and get the best job. It's actually the best speaker, because they will do the best in the interview. And though, it's not something that AI can teach you. It's something that you have to practice. And if all you're doing is sitting behind a screen, you are losing that ability to communicate. And I think for parents, I was just going to ask you, what are some of the things that parents can do to help their kids? I personally feel that is one of them. Really kind of getting your child to speak to other people, try to work with them on their speaking skills. What do you think are some of the other things maybe parents could do? And also on that note, before I get into, what I really want to hear about is the book, what are some things maybe teachers can do as well?
Well, good questions, Marissa. I think encouraging a child to get out of their room and go out and about in the world is a good thing. Look, I think that in terms of when social media and phones and technology begins to play a bigger role in your child's life, you have to communicate to them that this is a privilege, not a right. It is not their God-given right to own a phone and use it the way they see fit. That this is a privilege that you are paying for. And to that extent, I have encouraged parents to sign contracts with their child.
Okay.
To carefully on online, there are templates, believe it or not, where some parents have developed contracts for their, you just, Google like phone contract for my child, and you'll see it. And there's a bunch of rules. Parents have the right to check it. They could go through the history, especially a young child. Check it, go through the history, see who their contacts are, scroll their social media. Whenever a child is interacting with somebody or watching a video on a phone, or they're interacting with a stranger, unless they know the person, you're letting a stranger in. Would you leave the door to your house open and let people wander in? No. But with a phone or with a computer, this is what's happening. People have incredible access to your child, and vice versa. It could go the other way too, from your child to others. So I think that you have to present it to your child that there are limits, that we're going to give it to you, that the main reason you're getting it maybe is for safety, that you're getting older, the school you're going to now is a little further away, what have you. So just to, for you to be able to inform me where you are, and we are going to place controls on what you can watch on that phone. And I don't want to see you bypassing them, because I will know. So I think that's something. I also think parents should enforce a rule like tech-free dinners, that when you get together and you have a meal, no tech. It is so sad to me when I go out to eat and I'm at a restaurant and I see 4 people at a table, mom, dad, and 2 kids, all on their phones. And I'm thinking, what a missed opportunity. What a missed opportunity to converse and try to catch up and get into stuff with your child. It's law. You're on your phone. I realize, maybe that's an emergency or things come up, but more often than not, phone should be away. And in terms of, teachers, they can certainly facilitate social interaction. One of the ways they could do that, I think, is as they get to know their students in the beginning of the year, it's not a bad idea, do these icebreakers. I was a college instructor, and one of the things I did the first day of class, I did the M&M icebreaker. What's the M&M icebreaker? I would give out random M&Ms to the students. Okay, all the red ones here, all the blue ones there, all the green ones there. And then each color M&Ms would get a list of questions, like 4 or 5 questions, where the students have to interview one another. What do you do over the summer? What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite food? What's a hobby of yours? Questions like that. And then they would be forced to talk to one another, and they would get to know them. It would break the ice, which is the essential thing. And then after that, then there would be a spokesperson who would report to the group. Well, Jimmy likes that, and Terry likes this, and it was just a way to build a community. And I think classroom teachers are building communities. Teachers, at least here in the States, spend anywhere from 1,300 to 1,800 hours a year with their classroom, with their kids, depending on, how the school is run. And that's a lot of time. That's more time than parents spend with their kids.
Yeah,
many
from
parents.
Earlier statistic, way more time.
Way more. So teachers, I think are in a very unique position to try to facilitate connection within their group, within their classroom. Maybe they can assign group projects to do together. Or maybe just each day go around the room and have somebody spend 5 minutes talking about how they're feeling that day, or anything new in their lives, or, just a short intro. And eventually you go around the whole class over time, one a day. And just ways to facilitate connection and people getting to know one another. And look, you give them the foundation, and the hope and the expectation is that they're able to move further with it and take it out of the classroom and interact with one another.
Yes, I was going to say, in my mindset guide for teachers, which I will link in the show notes as well with your book, I have a list of like 130 connection questions that you can use. They're more geared towards like middle school or high school, but they're just like those little kind of icebreaker questions that you could invest 10 or 15 minutes into, or you could invest less than 5 minutes into, and they can help just sort of get to know the kids just for that little bit each session, right? I designed them like for those grades because sometimes we forget that I think as school goes forward, that connection, building those connections is going to be seen as the more important strategy to help
Oh,
kids, come through school almost rather than the academics. The academics will be important, but I think that connection is critical. And that leads me to your book, because I really want to hear about, you told me some amazing stories before with the book. I'd love to hear them, and about the strength-based model. And I know my podcast
thank you.
won't see this, but there's for my
Here's a
YouTube
copy of it,
viewers. There it
what
is.
it looks like.
The strength-based approach. I love it. So go grab that. Put that in the show notes for sure. And yeah, Stephen, tell us about the book. Tell us the stories. Like, yeah, go for it. I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, to your point, and this is the attitude in my book as well, teachers do all these things to connect, and you might have teachers that say, understandable, what are you talking about? I have barely enough time to do the curriculum. I don't have time to do all this. I have to focus on getting content done. And I don't deny that they have to get content done, but I think that what you want to do is you want to lay a foundation, you want to lay a basis. And the more that a child is connected to you, the more effective you're going to be as a teacher with them, and they're going to be successful academically and socially. And in terms of the book, this was one of the items on my bucket list when I retired from the school district. When I was a school psychologist, I spent a lot of time doing evaluations and testing children. The emphasis was always on identifying weaknesses. Why aren't they doing well? What's their deficit? What kind of special services can we give? And I felt at times that there wasn't enough emphasis on what are these children doing right? What resources do they bring to the table? So I always tried to keep that in my mind when I would meet with parents and evaluate a child. And I began doing more active work, consulting with teachers in my job in terms of looking at them from a strength-based model. And the strength-based model is, as it basically says, it's paying attention, not looking at what's wrong with a kid, but what's right with a child. And the medical model, which has been predominant in medicine for hundreds of years, that works very well in medicine. And then it was tried to bring it into mental health. And for many years, that's how mental health professionals looked at their patients or people they work with. There's deficits, what's wrong with them. And it wasn't until the mid-'80s where a psychologist named Martin Seligman, who was president of the American Psychological Association, gave a speech at a convention of psychologists and said, we need to get away from pathology. We need to look at what's right with people. We need to look at the virtues that they have and what they bring to the table. And that sparked a revolution. And to the point where it forced mental health clinicians to think about their patients differently. And it spilled over into education. It spilled over into the corporate world. Now, a lot of these big corporations have well-being in their as part of the services they offer to their employees in different ways.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a recognition that playing to people's strengths can be very effective. And so when I retired and had some time, I decided to write this book, which is kind of a manual for teachers, where I talk about, what the strength-based model is. It's just an expectation that you convey to a child that I believe in you. I want to see what you got. And even if you don't know what you got, even if you don't know what your strengths are, that's okay, because one of our jobs together is going to try to figure it out. And so I wrote this book, and it's full of exercises along with, cutting edge research on how teachers can implement a positive psychology or strength-based model in the school. I'll give you an example. There was there was a girl, she's about 9 years old, and she was really struggling in the classroom. She would come in late every day. B, when she would come in, her head would be down. She was lethargic. And when she wasn't really paying attention, she was on medication. She had attentional issues. And I had a consultation with the teacher who asked me, to speak with her. And there's different ways I could have gone. I could have looked at, well, gee, how are we going to remediate her lack of attention? How are we going to remediate her lethargy? How are we, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to fix that? So I just had this idea, and I said to her, tell me something. I know what she's not doing well. Tell me something that this girl is doing well. And she had to think for a minute, and she said, one of the things that she does really well is when she's on, which isn't often, but when she's on and in the zone, she can be very organized. Her desk can be organized. She's able to complete tasks, but it doesn't happen enough. It happens so far and few in between these times. So I said, well, let's think about a role that we can define for her in the classroom where she would have to use those strengths. And we talked, and I suggested her becoming an attendance monitor.
Okay.
So becoming an attendance monitor would mean that every day she would get a clipboard. She would walk around and check off child's name. And there's certain advantages to doing this. First of all, since attendance is taken first thing in the morning, it would help ensure that she'd be in on time, number one. Number two, she didn't have a lot of interaction with other kids, but by going around and just briefly interacting with them, that was already a start. And in terms of how it was presented to the child, it wasn't going to be the teacher saying, listen, you have to do this. Rather, it was, I need your help with something. I think you would be really good at this. I need your help. I'm very busy in the morning. As you know, I have a lot of things I'm doing, getting ready for the day. If you could take the attendance, walk around the room, make sure everybody is here, check it off, and leave it on my desk, that would be so incredibly big for me. And I think you could do it. I think you're capable. Well, it turns out the girl really liked it, liked the task, liked the suggestion. And within 2 weeks, she was given a clipboard. And within 2 weeks, she was coming in on time. She was beginning to interact a little bit with the kids. And we noticed a shift in her behavior. She was more engaged with the material. She wasn't sleeping on the desk as much. In fact, that even went away. And on the schoolyard, during lunch and recess, she was actually participating with children in activities. And this had not been done. She had not been doing this. And we just noticed a real shift in her mindset about school. And because I think before she thought it was a place that she had to go to and it was annoying and not rewarding. And here it was a place where she felt she was contributing. She was a member of the community and she was able to show some of her success, some of her skills. The postscript to that story is that the mother reached out to me and she was thrilled. And she says, I'm having issues with her at home. Her behavior at home is not always so good. We're always fine. Do you have any suggestions? And I came up with the idea of doing a good behavior book. So by that, I mean, every time the mother would see the child do something positive, it could be small, putting the dishes in the sink, hanging up her coat, saying thank you, helping her sibling with the homework, whatever it would be, the mother would make a note of it. And at the end of the day, as part of their bedtime routine, the mother would take out the book and say, hey, I saw you doing A, B, C, and D today, and that's great. And it became a very cherished part of their nighttime ritual between mother and daughter. And again, in a very short period of time, we saw a shift in this child's behavior at home. She was cooperative. The mother and her were not fighting as much, if at all. It really decreased. So playing into helping children identify their assets and strengths, it just improves their engagement. Another situation, we had a boy who was really a significant behavior issue in the school. Yeah. And it was a middle school child. He was about 13, and he was not towing the line. And we had to have a meeting to talk about his program for next year, his special education program. He was due to graduate. And I reached out to the parents before the meeting, and oh my goodness, they were so down on this boy. They were just saying, oh, he's impossible at home. He lies. He does this. He does that. And when I went to talk to the teacher to get their sense of the child, I heard more of the same. I'm thinking, this is going to be a difficult meeting. So we start the meeting, and they just pick up where they left off. The parents were very critical of their son, all the misbehaviors that he did. And the teachers, said, well, we're seeing a lot of these transgressions at school. He was accused of stealing the answers to a test. He was It was not a good scene. And I'm letting this go on for about 10 to 15 minutes, and there's a pause. And all of a sudden I say, listen, I said, I'm getting a very clear picture of everything, that he's struggling with. Can somebody tell me one thing he does well? There must be something in this world that he does well. Silence. It was a long silence, and it was an awkward silence. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, what did I do? Finally, the mother said, well, he's really good at video games. I go, really? Yes, he's really good at it. He spends a lot of time at it, but he's very talented at it. And the teacher then says, well, it's funny you say that, because when he comes into school, I do see him conversing with other children. They talk about these games, and he seems to really have a knowledge base of it. So I said, wouldn't it be an interesting experiment if we could find a way for him to take this knowledge and share it in some kind of a consistent way, because it's something he does well, it's something he enjoys, and I wonder if other kids would be interested in it. At that point, the teacher said, you know what? Why don't I help him write a book about it? Why don't I help him write a manual about it? It'll help his written language skills. I could certainly be supportive to him during it. And I think he needs to find something academically that is engaging to him, because he was really turned off to school. So that's what happened. The teacher helped this boy write this manual, and then she had the idea of having it laminated and put it in the school library. And she took it a step further, where she had small groups where he could lecture about the book and talk about the book, and talk about his discoveries, to small groups of kids. And we began to see this change in him. And he began to come to school. His behavioral issues dropped significantly. And he began to really be more motivated for school. And he began to turn his grades around. At home, his father said, one of the things he likes to do is work out. Really? Yes, we have weights. He does it all the time. I said, is that something you would have interest in doing? And he said, maybe. Well, why don't you do it with him? Why don't you collaborate with him on something that he enjoys doing? And the father started to do that. And that led to other things, such as the father and son actually beginning to play video games together. And you might look at this and say, well, this is rather simplistic, but really it's not. What it's doing is it's giving children, positive reinforcement. It's giving them positive attention. It's shifting their self-image of themselves to looking at themselves as can do rather than I can't. And I think that's an incredible mindset. And the postscript to this story is he graduated the school I was at that year, and he did well. And then he went off to high school.
Yeah.
A year later, he comes back to visit. And, oh, how you doing? How's everything? He says, you're not going to believe this. And I go, what's that? And he goes, I'm on the honor roll at high school.
Wow.
And if you would have told us a year and a half ago that he was on the honor roll. Now, look, I'm not going to say that meeting, created all of this, but what I will say is that it shows the power of mindsets, the assumptions that we make of ourselves and of our world, control what we tell ourselves, impact our behavior. We'll make, oh, I'm not good at that, so I'm never going to try it. And then you never know. So I think his mindset about himself was very negative. He had a very negative, I think, self-esteem about himself. The messages he kept getting from everybody was that you're not good, you're bad. And he internalized all that. When some of the outside messages began to change, so did he. And, we could have looked at it and said, well, he's depressed, maybe he needs medication, and I'm not saying that potentially couldn't have been helpful, but I think it shows the power of connection. And I just read interesting stuff.
Outlines the power of that connection, and with the parents too, not just with the teachers, but also like with parents connecting on a different level and wanting to, just, oh, my child's interested in this. Well, maybe I should just try it,
Maybe, I tell parents that if you're expecting for dramatic changes from your kid, they're going to see the light, there's going to be an epiphany, and they're going to change overnight, you're going to have a long wait if it'll ever happen. But it's the adults in their world that have to make the shift. It's the adults. So maybe, like to your point, Marissa, maybe you do need to sit down with them and ask them about how you play this game and what's it like and can you teach me. It's a way of building connection. One of the things that teachers and parents, I think, are very special is that they can be what is called a charismatic adult. A charismatic adult is a term by a psychologist named 𝐊𝐞𝐲 𝐓𝐨𝐸𝐬𝐲. And a charismatic adult is not somebody who has a lot of charisma or flamboyant, has a great personality. The way that he uses it, it's a person from whom a child can gather strength. And it could be a teacher, usually it is. It could be a mentor, it could be a coach, it could be a parent. And I think if children can see that adults can be sources of strength for them in their world, that's key. There was a study of children, many studies actually, of children that have been through really challenging childhoods. They really didn't have good circumstances growing up, but somehow they were able to rise above it and they became successful as an adult, either interpersonally or professionally. And when they get these people together and you ask them, what do you think, how'd you do it? The overwhelming number one answer is there was somebody who believed in me. I had somebody who believed in me, who thought I could do it and didn't give up on me. And that is the point in my book, that teaching with a strength-based model, helping children find their assets, their buried treasures, if you will, within. Not only does it open up a child's eyes in terms of what they're all about, but it fosters a greater connection between you and them. And that is the key variable in terms of student success. The United States Department of Education recently came out with a paper a few years back, and it said the number one way to reduce school violence is by having a school environment in which children feel they are cared for and they are connected. And the adults really care about them, basically. And that is, and that goes, I think, for a lot of endeavors. There has been a lot of research on psychotherapy. What makes psychotherapy effective? And yes, the skills of a therapist is certainly a variable. The motivation of the person to change is certainly a variable. But the most important variable that people think about is how I felt about my therapist, the relationship that I had. And I tell people that all the time. When a parent or a child calls, I start working with them. I tell them up front that I tell parents that whatever skills I have, but the most critical variable that's going to influence our work is the connection I'm able to establish with your child. And if that connection is there and it's positive and they feel it's positive, we make good inroads and we're off to a great start.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've heard the same came up in my mindset coaching courses. The best coaches are the ones that make a connection with the person that they are coaching, because you just build that trust and you know that person is kind of rooting for you and wants you to succeed and isn't just there because they have to be. So I think as we move forward in the 2025 and beyond, that power of connection we're going to see how much more important it's becoming, I think, all the time. And that's why I almost think, like with schools, I almost feel that at the beginning of the year with the teachers, we should almost just take like a couple of days and sort of just make connections with the kids, or have that as part of the lesson, is just a little bit of time to make that connection and not put so much pressure on the academics. I know with the States, I know, you teach to the test and it's just so much pressure. And I hope that the board, or the board of education around the world, can start to see how incredibly important, this
Well, think about it. To your point, Marissa, I mean, if you're in the working world, are you going to feel motivated to give your all to the job if you're working for somebody, if your supervisor or employer is somebody who you feel doesn't really care, or doesn't really value you as a person? I mean, who are you going to want to, or would you rather work for somebody who is collaborative and supports you and validates your efforts in a positive way? So you say first day of school, it just triggered a thought. One of the big fears children have, and I talk about this in the book, is a fear of making mistakes. And it will inhibit children and prevent them from raising their hand, from contributing. And I think teachers very, very early on are in a unique position to address that fear just by their relationship. So what I would tell teachers, and I write about, is the first day of school, I would have a teacher ask the class, who here is afraid of making a mistake? And the very first hand that goes up is the teacher. And the teacher then gives an example of an appropriate example of a mistake that they made. And then take it a step further. Who here has made mistakes? Who would like to share a mistake? And then take it a step further. All of us are going to make mistakes during the course of this year. How can we support each other? How can we be here for each other? And what that does, it universalizes and normalizes making mistakes and messing up. It makes it part of the experience and not something that kids have to fear, like, oh my God, I'm good. And by the teacher doing that and putting that out there very, very early on, not only will it strengthen her connection to the children, but it conveys to the kids, this is a safe place. And I could show my vulnerability. And I don't have to be afraid of, swinging and missing, and
Yes.
Someone will have my back.
Yes, I had a teacher friend who called it a retake rather than a mistake. Like, oh, should we do a retake?
Oh, I like that.
And from the beginning of the year, she said, okay, we're just going to we're just doing retakes. And I went to a course, she called it also something else. It was similar to like a redo. And the kids would say, like, I had a lot of retakes today. And you just try again, right? Because a retake is just, like a picture, right? You just take it again, you just try again. And
yes,
I
love that. A retake, and teachers, I know if a kid makes a mistake, they might red ink on the test paper. There was one teacher I know who I work with who would put green ink and say go next to a mistake. It was a jumping off point to, nice. Okay, let's try to figure out, like, what, and even if a child makes a mistake in a class discussion, they'll say, no, not right, next. Oh, why did you come up with that? What was the thinking behind that? What made you come to that conclusion? Yeah. And just try to explore, because sometimes, there are big mistakes and there are little mistakes. Yeah. So sometimes a child may have the concept, and maybe it's like doing a math problem. You solve this complicated proof and you mess up your arithmetic at the last step, and you're like a number, one or two numbers off. But a child could be way off or just a little off. Yes. But you don't know that if you don't want to listen to what they are thinking and reasoning was on it. So it's very important. So I think that's an example of how connection is so valuable in the classroom. And again, one of the criticisms of the strength-based model, people say, well, all it is just showering praise upon kids. You're ignoring their challenges. That's not true at all. We need to know what kids are struggling at, because people do struggle, and that helps us plan interventions. That gives us like a focus of what to proceed. But it's also important not to just focus on that and not the other thing. Just like I want to just focus on strengths, and you are interested in what the child needs to work on, but what can they bring to the table to help themselves and help us work with them on it.
No, definitely. It's so powerful. And for our final thoughts today, Stephen, so I've got a few quick questions. So other than your own, are there any books or podcasts that you would recommend to the listeners out there?
There's a podcast I recently became familiar with called Helping Teachers Thrive. Helping Teachers Thrive. It's on Apple. It's all about helping teachers find strategies to, work with their child. I think what you talk about in your podcast, Marissa, is very important. I like the title of your podcast, the mindsets. You emphasize mindsets in the title. It's so critical. It's so key. If I was to recommend anybody, there's a psychologist and author named Robert Brooks. And he has written a slew of books on this very topic, on resiliency in children and a strength-based model. He does a free monthly blog. If you go on his website, drrobertbrooks.com, drrobertbrooks.com. You get a wonderful free monthly blog. Is that selling you anything? And it just really is thought-provoking in terms of how the strength-based model can be applied and positive psychology can be applied to different areas. And he's written a slew of books. One of his best known is Raising Resilient Children. And it really encompasses a lot of what, I've been talking about in terms of using the strength-based model in the school.
Amazing. That's so cool. And I would like to back up your point about helping teachers thrive, because I've interviewed the person who does that podcast as well. We had the best.
Oh, Tam. Mm-hmm.
Tam, yeah, she was amazing. So I definitely encourage anybody to check out that interview as well. She really is so incredible. And so is her podcast.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is one piece of advice you would give to a first-year teacher today?
I think one piece of advice is never lose sight of why you became a teacher. Yeah. Even when things are going to get challenging, even when things may feel dark, never lose sight of what the initial impetus was and what led you to this field. Maybe for some, it's the external trappings, I guess, like summers off or a job or what have you. But I'm hoping there are many, many of you, and I think there are, that find joy in working with children and being a charismatic adult in their own way and being able to influence kids, and grow and develop and remember the lessons you taught them. So never forget what made you want to become a teacher. And the other thing I would say for first-year teacher on a more practical basis, seek out connections. Yes, we talk about kids with connections. Yeah. This is a hard job. It is not easy. Find a mentor or somebody that you could bounce ideas off of and share thoughts with. Don't do it alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So such wise words. 100% agree. And last one, Stephen, what 3 things are you grateful for today?
Well, one is being here with you doing this interview. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm grateful for my family. I have 2 wonderful sons, and they were 2 wonderful women, and that brings me a lot of joy. And my wife Tina as well. And I guess the other thing I'm grateful for, in addition to health, I would say, is that I did 30 years in the school and I loved it, but I'm looking forward to opportunities to share ideas and the wisdom I've gained over the years with other people, and to try to be hopefully a charismatic adult to somebody else. And that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I love coming on the podcast, and I do writing, and so teaching has become very important to me as well. And sharing this.
Amazing. Well, I am just so grateful for you, Stephen, and thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate, all the help you're giving teachers, parents, of course, the children, and helping them discover the strength within themselves, all of their strengths. And I wish you only the most success and prosperity as you move forward with all of your endeavors. It's very exciting, everything you're going to be doing with the book. And I can't wait to hear more about it. So thank you again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Marissa. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with everybody. And I wish you the best going forward as well in all of your endeavors.
Thank you.